So we have a very interesting parsha this week. The first Mossad agents sent to spy out the land, and not to be a big spoiler alert from the beginning, it doesn't exactly turn out with the type of success rate as Entebbe or anything. And it ends up leading to 40 years of wandering in the desert. Welcome, Abba. We're just getting started. We're talking about the Meraglim. So, the very beginning of this week's Torah portion starts off by the Ber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, Shlach licha anashim. He says, send for yourself men. The Yasuru Aseres Canaan to spy out, scout out the land. This already should be a red flag, because all the other times, God doesn't say if you want to, but here he's using the words licha. Licha means for yourself. If you decide you want to do it, then go ahead. If not, then I'm not commanding you to do it. Asher ani noisei livnei Yisrael, to spy out the land that I'm giving to the Jewish people. Ish echad lemata aresav, one person for each tribe. Tishlachu kol nasi bahem, send out, each one should send a nasi, the leader of their tribe. Vayishlach oisem Moshe, and Moshe sent them, midbar faran al pi Hashem, kula omanoshim rashay v'nei Yisrael hema. Each one of these people were heads of the tribes. These were not just anybody. These were great individuals, each in their own right. And then the Torah goes on and tells you the names of each one. Reuven, you had Shamua ben Zachor, Shimon, Shaphat ben Chayri, Yehuda, you get Kalev ben Yefuneh, and Yisachar, Yigal ben Yosef, and Ephraim, Hoshea ben Nun. But these two from the tribe of Yehuda and Ephraim, we'll see, are going to stand out as something very significant. So we know the story. They go into the land, and they're quite intimidated by everything that they see. And they decide we have to change up our plan and try to convince the Jewish people not to go. And so, like any good lie, they start with something true. So always has to be some truth in order for your words to be even considered. So jumping ahead a little bit to where they came back. Says Vayashuvu mitor haaretz miketz arba'im yom. At the end of 40 days, they came back from spying out the land. Vayelchu v'vel Moshe v'Aaron el kol adas bnei Yisrael el midbar faran, and they went back to Moshe and to Aaron and all the congregation of the Jewish people to midbar faran, to Kadesh. Vayashivu aisam davar, and they brought back their report. They went and they showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, we are coming back from the land that you sent us to. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. This is its fruit. And they showed them it took 4 people to carry one cluster of grapes. You know, it was a huge, amazing land they saw. But then, after starting on a good foot, they said, however, the people that inhabit the land are mighty, and the cities are extremely huge and fortified. And we even saw the offsprings of giants that evaded the divine retribution in the times of the flood. The Amalekis are in the south of the land, while the Chittis, the Yevusis, the Amorites dwell in the mountainous regions, and the Canaanites dwell on the coast alongside the Jordan. Vayas kol levis kol ha'am el Moshe. Vayomer Allah aloy na'aleh. Kolev, Ben Yefuna, he said, shh, everybody quiet, listen to Moshe. He said we can surely go up and take possession over it. V'yarashnu, we will inherit it. Ki yachol nuchola, because we can surely overcome it. We can do it. But the other people, they said, we are not able. We cannot. I cannot. This is a very important key as well. Lo nuchal means you can't do it. Nuchala means we can do it. These changing of phrases is the difference between success and failure. But that's what they said. We said, Lo nuchal, the other spies, they said, Lo nuchal la'alei sala'am, ki chazak hu mimanu. They said, we're not able to because they are stronger. And so this evil report that they said passed through the whole camp of Israel. And they said that it's a eretz oicheles yeshvahi. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. And they saw a people of high stature. And they saw the giants, the son of Anak, descended from the giants. In our eyes, they were grasshoppers. And we even heard them saying, yeah, look at those little like grasshopper looking people down there. And so the whole congregation raised their voices and they cried out on that night. This night they didn't need to cry, but it led to what's called a bechia l'deiros. It became a night of crying for all future generations. What was this night? The 9th of Av. Vayalinu al Moshe v'yel Aaron kol b'nei Yisrael v'yomer aleim kol ha'eda lu masnu be'eretz Mitzrayim oy b'midbar hazeh lu masnu. And they came and they started complaining against Moshe. They said, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if we had just died in the desert. Why did Hashem take us out of here to fall by the swords? Noshenu v'tapenu yil of us. Our wives and our children will be as spoils. Alo toiv lanu shuv Mitzrayim. Would it not be better for us to just go back to Egypt? So they said, let's appoint a new leader and go back. Go to fall back to Egypt. So now Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces before the entire congregation of Israel. And Yeshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yefuna were from those who were among the scouts. Karu bigdayim. They tore their garments. That's the mourning practice that we do. When you hear horrible news, like somebody passed away, you tear your garments. Or if you see the Holy Temple in ruins, you tear your garment. You rent your clothing. And the two spies who were on the good side, Kalev ben Yefuna and Yeshua ben Nun, they said, we went through the whole land and it's really good. It's very, very good. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Hashem wanted to destroy the entire Jewish people for this great calamity, but Moshe davened and saved them from this plague. And instead, just the spies who brought back the evil report were punished. But Hashem sort of spread out that punishment over generations, a bechia l'doidos, and also said that you guys, you really didn't want to go into Egypt, so you're not, you guys really didn't want to go into Israel, so you're not going to go in. But your children, the next generation, will go in. And this is where our GPS breaks and we get lost in the desert for 40 years. This was the moment. Now the big question on this is, Moshe didn't just pick the best, reconnaissance experts, like trying to test people out in the army, like who could be part of the elite unit that's going to break into to Rafah and rescue the 4 hostages. Who's got the best shot? They asked. One of them broke in the door first. He said, how did you decide which one of you 4 were going to go in first? And they all said it was this guy. Well, why is it this guy? Because he's got the best shot. That's why. He was within a second, he was able to identify who were the terrorists, who were the hostages, and boom, boom, clear out the whole room. But Moshe was picking people based on their spiritual stature. The Nasi, B'nai Yisrael, these were the heads of each one of the Shvatim. How could they have gone so wrong? I mean, even if you weren't such a great spiritual giant, imagine seeing the splitting of the sea and all the 10 plagues. You witnessed the manna falling from heaven and the clouds of glory washing your clothing all the time. And now you're like, maybe we can't do this? Maybe they thought, okay, those were the miracles in Egypt, but now, the 7 nations that lived in Canaan, they are perhaps stronger and bigger. But you can't really say that because do you know who was the military and economic superpower at that time?
God.
Well, everybody was afraid of the Jewish people after they had left Egypt. But before they left Egypt, it was the Egyptian empire that was kind of like the big central power of the world. So, you might have a lot of different countries throughout Europe, and they might even band together and create like some sort of, alliance, but they're still not going to win a war against a mighty empire like United States, for example. It's like the economic or military superpower of the world right now. So Egypt was that, but even more centralized at that time. They had all the wealth, all the strength, all the power. And they had just witnessed God smite them to smithereens. Like there was no, they were left so humbled and so shattered because Hashem didn't just like forcefully take them out. The whole 10 plagues over the course of a year and the splitting of the sea, all of these miracles were to really drive home that God is the superpower of the world. So why should these 7 nations even pose one iota of a threat to them? Why are they intimidated by the nations living in Canaan?
I don't think they were. I think it was a power thing. They liked the power they had over the tribes, being number one. And when they went, they feared losing the power and thought that now we're going to have to kowtow to maybe to Joshua, Yeshua, who was going to lead them in, or how it was going to go. So you know how politics is. It's the same today. Look at Bernie. Look at all these idiots. I hated it forever, and I still hate it.
Maybe
I haven't voted forever.
lying.
Maybe it was slave mentality.
Yeah, but they even said, when they said Ki chazak hu mimenu, that they are stronger than us, one of the interpretations is mimenu, than him, meaning they thought that ein balabayis, that the owner of the house cannot remove his vessels from there. They thought, so to speak, like God himself couldn't remove the Canaanite, or the 7 nations living in the land of Canaan at that time. But they knew that there was going to be a fundamental shift when they go into Eretz Yisrael. When they were in the desert, everything was provided in a miraculous order. They knew that going into the land of Israel meant that it's going to be an Eretz Neishavis. It's going to be a dwelled land. It's going to be a land where they're going to have to integrate into the stable framework of ordinary life. In the desert, they were involved in spiritual matters and all the miracles that went around with it, but they knew, and it actually did happen, that when they went into the land of Israel, The manna stopped coming from heaven. The miraculous well of Miriam ceased, and the clouds of glory went away. So they figured, if God was going to lead us into the land, like he took us out of Egypt in a miraculous fashion, fine, of course, nothing can stand in the way of the miraculous order. But you want us to do this naturally? To wage like a military? We're a bunch of nomads, ex-slaves, haven't really trained with a weapon, and these guys are giants, been training for military strength and might their whole life. There's no way we could take them on physically. Take them on spiritually with miracles, sure, God could do that. But you told us that the miraculous order is going to cease. That it's going to be an Eretz Neishev, it's going to be a natural order. According to the natural order, then it's impossible. We can't do it. But what did Kalev ben Yefuneh and Yeshua ben Nun say? They said, Im chafetz banu Hashem. They said, if Hashem desires it, he'll give us that land. Because God's inner desire is for the Jewish people to create a dwelling place in a physical land, in Israel, they should realize that, like they said, Heim lachmeinu heim, they are our bread. Vashem itonu al tiraum, God is with us. Do not be afraid. We have nothing to fear confronting the world. Although the natural order will remain, that's God's innermost desire, is that we should have supernatural success in the context of the natural world. So then the world will become our bread, so to speak. We will consume it. We'll be able to elevate the sparks of holiness that are within the world, even as it's in the context of a physical world. What miracle do you think is a greater miracle? The splitting of the sea or the Purim miracle, where Queen Esther happened to be chosen, happened to be in the right place at the right time, and Mordechai and happened to be able to either manipulate King Achashverosh's insecurities or whatever, got him in the right time at the right place in order to convince him to execute his most trusted prime minister, Haman. Which one's a bigger miracle?
Splitting of the sea.
Why?
I don't know. I think because the more people involved in a project, the more situations or miscommunications or like things can happen. Like it's like even like when I'm on my own, I'm in control. Like, but when you have kids and like whole family, it's completely different dynamic. It's like it's a greater mechanism, so it's more complicated.
So which one is greater?
So we don't know the answer yet, but I think the splitting of the sea is a greater miracle than because Queen Esther,
which one like shatters all of the bounds of nature, and which one is kind of just working within the mechanism of nature?
Because the second one is like it's a human nature. He's a man and she's a beautiful young woman who is also smart and interesting, and also she has no choice. And when the person has no choice, the creativity is like limitless. So that one is like it was luck, but also luck. It was a calculated move. But the first one, it was like lots of people involved, lots of people who are skeptical, I guess. And also splitting of the sea is very, like it's not something that happens every day.
Right.
Like,
so the splitting of the sea is definitely a more like earth-shattering miracle because it changes the very nature. The water is now standing and being held as a wall. Whereas there are many miracles, like the daily miracles that we have. We got to thank God for miracles all the time that are happening. But these are miracles that are baked into nature. Where if you ask a skeptic, they would say, well, just by chance. Somebody by the splitting of the sea, even the biggest skeptic would be kind of blown away. Now, 3,000 years later, they want to explain it with the winds and blah, 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 but it doesn't take away from the miracle that happened right then, even if those explanations held even a grain of salt. But you're standing by the splitting of the sea, it's more of an earth-shattering miracle. By the Purim story, it's called a Nes Hameluvash B'Teva. It's a miracle enclosed within nature. So in regards to the magnanimity of a miracle, the nature-shattering miracles are bigger. But if the whole purpose is fusion, divine unity, then there's actually a superiority to the miracles that are in nature. Because when God, so to speak, needs to break nature in order to create this miraculous salvation, it almost makes it look like nature is one thing, it has its power, and God is above it, and God can sort of break that hold that nature has on this world. Whereas a miracle that's within nature shows Havaya hu Elokim. The nature itself is another mechanism and a way that God operates. So a miracle within nature is something that brings out that divine unity even greater. And that's the novelty of what the Jewish people were trying to accomplish with going into the land of Eretz Yisrael, to fuse nature with beyond nature. So they had to go into the world and wage war militarily and strategically, and yet to have this miraculous victory. Like the miracle of the Iron Dome, for example. That's a Nes Hameluvash B'Teva. That's a miracle that happens every time that you can program, a missile to meet another missile up in the air. But it's enclosed within nature because God doesn't want us to just kind of sit back and say, God's hand will protect us and therefore we don't have to do anything about it. We have to use all of our strengths and expertise to try to protect ourselves. But it's no less of a miracle in a way. It's actually a greater miracle if the purpose is fusion, unity. So now we can understand why Kalev said, let's go up, v'yarashnu Isa, and let's inherit it. First of all, he says, Aloi na'aleh. Aloi na'aleh is a aliyah after aliyah. Somebody goes to Eretz Yisrael, it's called making aliyah. So there's one level of aliyah to get to a point of miracles. There's aloi na'aleh, miracle on top of a miracle, or a elevation on top of an elevation, that not only have you reached a miraculous order, but you're even bringing out the divine miracles into nature. And then you inherit the land like a Yerusha, an inheritance. Even though they had to fight for it. What do you mean it's an inheritance? Well, they're inheriting it because they are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God promised them the land. But inheriting is different than a present. It's different than a reward. It's different than conquest. Different ways that you can acquire things. When a child inherits their parent, they take the place of the parent. In America, they charge taxes on everything. So if a parent dies, they have inheritance tax. But according to the Torah law, it's not like the property changes possessions, where it used to belong to Yankel, and now it belongs to Yosef ben Yankel. But rather, when you do a transaction, normally the object changes ownership. It changes, it's almost like it's moving to another domain. But when something is inherited, it sort of remains how it is, but the inheritor takes possession of it in the place of their father. So taking possession of Eretz Yisrael in this type of way means that the world itself is God's world. And it's not like it's transferring from, one domain to another, but that the very vessels of this world become a divine inheritance. They bind with the very divine essence. So the lesson that we can learn from the episode with the spies and our divine service is, we also have our desert moments and our going into Israel moments. In a way, what the spies really wanted was just to remain in the spiritual oasis of the desert, where they were learning straight from Moshe. They got that special spiritual connection by eating the man, like we spoke about, what was it, just last week, that it spiritualized them, it made them receptive to the Torah's teachings, it uplifted them. So they wanted to stay in this spiritual oasis. They wanted to stay in that state. They knew going into the land would mean a shift. It would mean dealing with the world. So in our lives, we have our time period of the desert, which ideally would be, let's say, a person's childhood, where they're totally engrossed in Torah, divine service. They don't have to worry about a mortgage. They don't have to worry about finances. They don't have to worry about anything. Their whole focus is just being involved in Torah study and prayer. Or even on a daily basis. What do we do when we first wake up? We say, Moidani lefanecha, we thank God for our very neshama. And then right away we focus on learning Torah and davening and getting engrossed in spiritual service. Before we tackle life's tasks, we first have this desert-like experience where we're just in this spiritual cloud. And that's very good. But a person might think, so I could retain my focus, my zeal, my spirituality, and my enthusiasm while I'm in the desert stage. But when it comes time to go out into the world, well, that's my assimilation moment. I must assimilate in order to cope. How am I supposed to go into the business world and really reckon with all of the details? You got to make sure your books are actually accurate and you're doing things above the line, doing things accurately. And what, you're not going to get caught up in the land? Of course, it's a helpless. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. It's not possible to go into the material world and not get consumed by it. That was the claim that the spies made. So what should we do? The spies said, let's just stay in the desert. Forget about going into the land. It's so much better here. We could just stay in yeshiva. We can try to focus on just our spiritual pursuits and learning all day long. And forget about trying to go into business, raising a family, and doing all of those worldly things. The lesson of the spies teaches us that not only are we able to remain holy and pure during times of prayer and spiritual devotion, but even in our worldly affairs, we can do, like King David said, B'chol darchecha de'ehu, to know Hashem in all of your ways. That even though they are your ways, oh sorry, it's from Mishli, not Tehillim. B'chol darchecha de'ehu, to know Hashem in all of your ways means that even though there are your ways, you're eating, your business, you're taking care of physical things, it's not even, for the sake of a mitzvah so directly. Nevertheless, it's all about getting to know Hashem, that we are able to bridge this gap. Im chafetz banu Hashem, if Hashem wants it, and we know this is Hashem's desire, is that we shouldn't only cleave to Hashem on Shabbos or on the high holidays, but or even the daily routine that we have in the morning of spiritual practice, but specifically throughout the day. That's where the real litmus test of our divine service is found. Are we going to cave, or are we going to elevate it? So it's not so recognizable on a person who's just involved in spiritual pursuits, whether or not they fully synthesized the divine ideals. It's only once the person goes out into the world of concealment and they're interacting with the mask, the external dimension of this world, that you can see if it's truly a divine service, if it's something that either, because the fear that the spies had was not completely unfounded. We see countless examples around us, and perhaps even in our own lives, where dealing with materiality makes us materialistic people. The spies abhorred that concept, that somebody's going to be so caught up in Gashmias, so particular about their juicy steak, that's their whole geschmack in life, or the Rebbe a lot of times mocked what was the fancy car in the 70s? I don't know. There was a certain type of car, a Cadillac.
Cadillac.
Yeah. You gotta have a Cadillac, and this is the whole geschmack in life that you're driving a Cadillac. The fact that we become materialistic people, that it's an eretz helpless yoshvahi, is unfortunately a reality that we've wrestled with throughout history. You deal with materiality. They felt it's inevitable that you're going to become materialistic people. Kalev ben Yefuna and Yeshua ben Nun said, no, if Hashem wants us to do it, we can do it. Which for us means that we could go down into Golus, we could be far away from Eretz Yisrael, we could be far away from the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, and yet we can infuse Kedusha and holiness right where we are. With all of the chaos and corruption and anti-Semitism and all of the mishagas that's going on, we have the ability, in Chafetz Banu Hashem, because God desires it, to make this world into a godly and holy place. Now, to take that one step further, it's not just enough to work with ourselves, but also to have an influence on another. It says in Kabbalah that the spies wanted to stay in the world of machshava, the world of thought. They didn't want to go down into the world of speech or the world of action. Thought is something that exists for oneself. Your thoughts are your hidden recesses, right? Elon Musk's trying to come up with something that'll be able to read your thoughts, but that's unnatural, right? Thoughts are for yourself. Speech is to communicate to another. The idea of taking the world of thought, the Jews in the desert, and going into the land of Israel is going from just working on oneself to spiritualize and refine what you can refine both in your spiritual practice and in your business dealings, and then to care so much about another that you reach out to them. And you don't just think about them, but you talk, you relate to them. You have that type of communication where somebody might not be on your same level or have the same outlooks and attitudes on life, but yet the cords of love create this bridge of communication. where you could speak to another and have a relationship and care. And it's very important to not get lost in the desert, in the world of thought, where we're only working on ourselves, but to go into the world of speech, and that means to relate to another. You know, sometimes words fail us because words, although there's this huge, let's call it Overton window of people that you could relate to and people that you could talk to, some people are just have such different ideas that it's like you're speaking words and they don't understand what you're saying. And there's like, as if there's nothing to relate to. You could try, but it's like, there are some people that are, that you feel like that you can't relate to them whatsoever. But this is where the next stage of sort of integration comes in. To not get lost in the world of speech, but to go down into the world of action. Because what does everyone understand? Action. Even if you take a stone, you throw it, that stone was acted upon. Stone doesn't need consent, but when you're dealing with a fellow human being, and you bring them a hot bowl of chicken soup because they were sick, even if it was somebody that you couldn't speak to, you couldn't relate to, when you do chesed, when you do action, the action connects. No matter how far distant or far blown you might think they are, that action can relate.
Yeah, I just recall the anecdote, like it was like real life, like we were talking about like natural event versus supernatural, and it's there was a Jewish composer in Russia. I don't remember his last name. So he was going to go to the US, and he ordered to a tailor for his costume. And it's like after 6 weeks, he didn't get his pants. So he was mad. He calls his tailor and he says, how come it took a God just 6 days to create a world and it's taking you 6 weeks? Finish. Let me finish. And it takes you 6 weeks to finish just a pair of pants. And the tailor says, yeah, it took him 6 days, but look at it.
That's very good.
And it was just looking at all these events, look at it.
Right. It's like, hey, like you never really finished. Like the guy who was cleaning out his house and he comes across this old ticket that's for shoe repair, and it's on the
I
lower
can't believe you're telling
side.
this one.
And so he goes to see, he assumes the shop's probably long out of business, but he looks it up and they're still there. So he brings in the old ticket and he goes to the guy behind the counter and he shows him a ticket from decades ago. And he wouldn't be shocked if they didn't have the shoes anymore. The guy looks at the ticket, he goes in the back, he comes back, I said, they'll be ready in 1 week.
That's it. Exactly. Have you heard of the album When You're in Love, The Whole World is Jewish? It's performed on that. It was a Broadway play. It's hysterical. It's online. You can find the album. It's hysterical. The jokes are great.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful.
So there was a chassid who came across from Russia or Ukraine. He emigrated to America. And the Rebbe was speaking about putting on tefillin with their fellow Jews, doing a mitzvah. And this guy was still acclimating. He didn't speak English, but the Rebbe spoke in Yiddish. He understood the message, and he went out into the streets. And he came across a guy who is clearly Jewish, and he was trying to communicate to put on tefillin, but the guy didn't understand what he was saying. So he said very simply, I Jew, you Jew. I tefillin, you tefillin. And the message resonated. And the guy rolled up his sleeve and they put on tefillin. They did a mitzvah. They did a prayer together.
Awesome.
Sometimes when speech doesn't work, because they were different languages from different worlds, right? This guy was coming from the old Hasidic shtetls over there. And here is a American guy from a few generations American. They didn't relate. They didn't speak the same language. They didn't have chords of communication. Yet action cuts through and connects between one person and another. And so we have to learn from the mistake of the spies who avoided going into the world of action. And first of all, ensure that even in our machshava, even in our own divine service, that it doesn't just remain in the holier aspects of our lives, but manifests in all that we do, as well as comes out into the world of speech, which means that we find somebody not necessarily on the same level or ideology as us and communicate and connect with them and reach out to every single Jew, no matter what and no matter who, even somebody that you have no words. There's no communication. It's like a rock. Nevertheless, the chesed, the kindness that we do, both taking care of them physically and spiritually, caring for one another, is something that breaks through those barriers and reveals Havayahu Elohim, how this world itself and the nature and very physicality of this world is actually the perfect setting for the indwelling of the divine presence, so that there's different prophecies about what it will be like when Mashiach comes, and some say the world will continue to run naturally, and others talk about these miraculous shifts and changes. One of the ways that you can fuse the two is the world will be so uplifted and purified that the very nature of the world will be giant fruit and abundance for all and peace and prosperity. That's just right now it seems like nothing short of a Messiah coming. Can you have something like that? And it seems like so otherworldly. And yet, like, through our avodah, every mitzvah that we do and all of that integration that we have with this world reveals the true reality of nature, which is it's God's home. It's a beautiful world where we care for one another, when we share and look out for one another. There's no poor people left. There's no sickness left. People can live forever. All of these things, which seems so miraculous and miracles of biblical proportion, will be like the Purim story, a miracle in nature. All of a sudden, we realize, okay, we don't have to kill each other anymore. We could just live in peace, and we could have prosperity, and there's plenty of food to go around, and nobody has to be hungry. And the whole passion of the entire world will just be to know Hashem.